Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey you guys, welcome to Knowing Animals podcast. Knowing Animals is a podcast where we talk to animal studies scholars about a piece of their work. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan and I do like knowing animals. Now this episode of Knowing Animals is brought to you by ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association, also known as ASA. It's the membership body for academics, artists and advocates interested in animal issues. The best way to help ASA help you is by becoming a member. Membership is just $50. If you're not already a member of ASA, please think about joining. To find out more about the organisation, you can go to their Facebook page or simply Google ASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Now, this episode is also coming to you from the ASA conference, which is being held at the University of Adelaide. I'm in Adelaide today. Unfortunately, it's quite a grey day in the city of churches, but nonetheless, we're on day 2 of the conference and it's been absolutely fabulous. So today I'm very lucky to be joined by a special guest who is here also to speak at the conference. I'm joined by Associate Professor Tania Signal, who is from the School of Health, Medical and Applied Sciences at Central Queensland University. Now today we're going to be discussing her paper Double Jeopardy, Insurance, Animal Harm and Domestic Violence, which appeared in the journal Violence Against Women in 2017. And we should also acknowledge her co-authors, Nik Taylor, who we've had on the podcast, Karena, Burke and Luke Branlow. Welcome to the podcast, Tania.
Thank you, Siobhan.
So, Tania, can you start by telling us what inspired you to write this article?
Well, one of the real privileges of being an academic is that you can find a cause that you're interested in and you can be an activist, and you can be an activist in different ways. One of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is the role of animals within domestic violence, both as pawns of domestic violence and as barriers for people getting out of those kind of relationships. So one of the go-to reads for me is the link letter that's put out by Phil Arco in the States. And I was reading through an edition back in January last year, and they had a little vignette of a woman in Sweden who had been in a domestic violence relationship. Her dog had been targeted by her abusive partner, multiple vet visits. She had pet insurance, so the pet insurance had covered the different vet visits. The relationship ended in unfortunately, the typical way where the abuser had become extremely violent. The animal had been very badly harmed, ended up at the vet and died of the injuries. And at that point, the pet insurance company became aware that the injuries had been sustained within a domestic violence relationship, and they not only refused to cover the final vet fees, but they actually sued the woman for all of the past costs. And the vignette ended with, does this happen in other countries? Is this something that's unique to Sweden? And it made me go, I wonder. So, but luckily, being an academic, I could go and have a look. So we went and we pulled up all of the public disclosure statements, the statements that insurance companies in Australia that are offering pet insurance, and looked to see what exclusions they had, because it's a problem. If a woman or a man who's in a domestic violence situation, if they believe the hype which says pet insurance is a cheap, easy way to look after your animal, and it's $5 a week, and you know that your animal is being harmed, and this is a way that you can try and guarantee their safety, the last thing you need is then to find out that your insurance is null and void. So it's another barrier.
So, Tania, some of our listeners might not have ever thought about the issue of companion animals and animal abuse and domestic violence. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the link is, or what the research suggests the link is between these things?
Sure. It's a soapbox of mine, so you'll just have to tell me to stop talking. The idea behind the link is that animals are very much part of the family. So they are just as much a victim of violence and can be a target of violence within domestic violence as any other human, two-footed part of the family. And often abusers will actually deliberately target animals because people are so attached to their animals. They're an easy target. People pay less attention to someone hitting a dog than they do hitting a woman or a child, which is a sad statement on our society. But there's a lot of research showing that animals can be both the victims of that kind of domestic violence, but they can also be a really significant barrier for a woman or man to leave that violent relationship, because most domestic violence shelters, you can't take your pets with you. So if you escape the violence, you're leaving your beloved animal behind, and of course the abuser then has no one else to take it out on, and you've left that animal behind. So animals can be a very significant part of domestic violence.
So you had a look at companies in Australia offering pet insurance.
Yes.
And what did you find in terms of exclusions or exemptions?
So we found that every single pet insurance that is on offer in Australian market excludes deliberate harm by a known other. So if you are in a domestic violence situation, even if you have a flatmate who harms your animal, you will not be covered by pet insurance. So you could have taken out pet insurance, and you will not be covered. So you will have to foot those bills yourself. It then puts a very big onus on vets, because vets, there's discussions going around about whether vets in Australia should become mandated reporters. They are mandated reporters of animal abuse in quite a few states in America. They are expected to report in New Zealand. So in Australia, they're not currently. In a lot of cases, the first person who's going to see animal harm is going to be a vet, because the animal's been brought to them one way or another. So it starts putting vets into a very bad position, because if they report that what they suspect is animal abuse, then they're going to know that insurance isn't covered. And that puts the human part of the equation in a very bad situation, which may mean that the victim of the violence doesn't want to bring their animals forward, because then they're not going to be covered. So it becomes quite a conundrum.
Yes, so the role of vets as intermediaries in this situation is very complicated, and I've heard arguments for and against mandating the reporting of domestic violence by vets or suspected domestic violence. What's your view on the proper role of vets in this situation?
I agree. It's incredibly complicated, and without more support for vets, it can't happen. Vets. People who are mandated reporters of, say, child abuse, like teachers, doctors, they get training on how to report signs, what to look for, how to report, ways to keep themselves, safe, as well as to make sure that the human in the equation is okay. Vets need that kind of training if we're going to make them mandated. But there's extra issues there around privacy. There's issues around what happens to a vet if they suspect that it's animal abuse, they report it, and then it finds out that it isn't. Will they be up for libel? So there's a whole heap of things that we need to sort out before we go down that track. Having said that, I think it does need to happen. I think it's the more eyes we have out there, the more ways that we say this kind of behaviour is unacceptable and that we as society stand up against it, the better.
So you've identified the problematic nature of insurance for women, or predominantly women, who are the victims of domestic violence or suffering domestic violence. What now? How do you get this information out, or what do you do to try and help people in this situation?
Okay, so I think there's a few things that we can do. In Australia, at the time we looked at the insurance policies, there are only 2 underwriters of all of the insurance companies. So there's two organisations that are behind all of these insurance policies. If even one of them turned around and said, in a situation where it is I don't like the word validated, but you know what I mean, a notified, the police have been involved, domestic violence situation, we will cover this, then it would make such a huge difference. And one of the problems, which I write about in the paper, is this kind of insurance discrimination in domestic violence situations is common in health insurance and life insurance, and it's a big issue in the States, not so much in Australia. But all of these, the reason why they have these, you can't benefit from the criminal actions, doesn't apply in this situation. So the very rule and the reason why these exclusions are there don't apply, because it's not the victim who's benefiting, it's the abuser. So the abuser actually benefits by the insurance being taken away. So it's a matter of educating the insurance companies, trying to show them that, you know what, actually this could be a marketing technique. If you turn around and say, we stand by domestic violence victims, there's a lot of us who have pet insurance that are on board with this kind of thing, who would swap our pet insurance to those. And for places like the RSPCA, they're in a very bad position, and that's where one of the ways I've tried to outreach and take this information out was to contact the RSPCA, because they have an insurance that is under their brand. It's advertised on the same page and the websites as the Safe Bed for Pets, which is the domestic violence initiative where they are providing care for women who are leaving violent relationships and they look after their pets. So on the same website as they're saying we acknowledge this link and we're providing this safety, there's an ad for RSPCA insurance which says a easy, cost-effective way to guarantee the safety of your pet. But RSPCA pet insurance doesn't cover any deliberate actions. So therefore, you could take that out, think that you're going to be safe, you end up in a Safe Beds for Pets initiative, well, your insurance is null and void.
And what did the RSPCA say?
We've had a stunning silence so far. I talked to someone at the recent Lucy's Project conference in November last year when we were first sort of getting this work out and published, and they were very worried about it, and they said it's our brand and our brand is out there, so they were taking it back to the insurance. But obviously, you know, these kind of policy things take a while to work through.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, in your view, is this merely an oversight on the part of the underwriters, or is this do they understand the implications of the way they've structured the insurance?
I think it's a misunderstanding of the situation. I think it taps into the whole discrimination against men and women who have been victims of domestic violence. It's part of the whole insurance discrimination. It's part of a bigger picture of the way in which we look at disenfranchised, vulnerable others. And it's a small slice of the pie. I mean, in the States, the insurance discrimination around health insurance and medical insurance is much bigger. But this is a thing that's affecting us in Australia, and it's something we can do something about. So, hence my soapbox.
Well, Tania, I ask everybody who comes on Knowing Animals to answer 5 quick questions. Are you ready for your 5 quick questions?
Sure am, yes.
Can you recall the first piece of pro-animal scholarship you ever read?
I can. I grew up, shall we say, academically in an animal welfare behaviour lab. So my first sort of foray into animal welfare is very much from the Stamp Dawkins, Appleby, that kind of, 5 freedoms. And it wasn't until I came to Australia that I arrived into a corridor with Nik Taylor in the office next to me, who comes from an animal rights background, and we had some really good ding-dongs in the corridor, and she got me to read Carol Adams, and that was like a window opening up. So that's probably my first
Wonderful.
Real animal rights, animal activism kind of, yeah.
Can you recall the first piece of pro-animal scholarship you ever wrote?
It would have been the very first paper that Nik and I had published looking at links between attitudes to animals and empathy and behaviours and the way people treat animals. Yep.
Wonderful. If you had to name one animal studies scholar who's had a big impact on you, who would it be?
It would have to be Nik. We've worked together now for 14 years, and I wouldn't be going down the track that I am if it wasn't for those first arguments that she made me look at things from a different perspective.
Well, that's lovely, because Nik has been on the program and she named you, so that's a beautiful reciprocal relationship.
That's probably why we still get on after 14 years of arguing, yeah.
What's the most important thing academics can do for animals?
I think we have to understand that we are in a position of privilege. We have got the ability to stand up and make our voices heard, and we need to do that. And we'll all have different causes, we all have different things that we feel passionate about, but we need to do it. We can't just go quietly about our day-to-day jobs. We've got to be out there, we've got to be talking to media, we've got to be in the newspaper, we've got to get our message out.
If you had the power to change one thing about the human-non-human animal relationship, what would it be?
That's a really hard question, because I kind of feel like I want to do I want peace for the whole world kind of thing. I think it would be understanding the sentience of animals. So understanding that they have private lives just the same as we do, And once you get the feeling, once you understand that and you realise they have a will to live, they have the same family drives, they have the same thing as us, it makes it so much harder to then use them as victims and to use them in ways that aren't in their best interest.
Well, thank you so much, Tania. So what are you working on next?
Well, actually, from being at this conference, I now have about 36 different projects that I really want to work on. The next thing Nik and I are doing a paper for a special edition of a criminology journal looking at a move forward and advance from our very first paper, which is around attitude to animals and empathy and the way you interact with people. And we're looking at one that's more nuanced around the type of animal, so using our pet pest profit. So that's probably our next thing that we're working on and sort of advancing that idea.
Wonderful. So how can people find out more about your work?
Well, they can always email me. They have a look at any of the papers that we've published. Their email address is there. I'm at Central Queensland University. I'm pretty easy to find. Do a Google, and I'm always happy to have a chat.
Well, Tania, thank you so much for coming on Knowing Animals, and thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, the podcast where we talk to animal studies scholars about their work. Now, I say this all the time. I'm going to say it again. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at knowing_animals, or you can follow me at SO_S. We also have a Facebook page called Knowing Animals. And don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Reviews make it easier for other people to find us. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals.